My boyfriend thought I needed some fresh air. I have never really been a fan of the great outdoors, but he insisted on taking me to his family's cabin in Michigan for a Thanksgiving weekend getaway. No crazy shopping or internet access. It would just be him and me for 3 days surrounded by the woods. I figured at least we would be inside an actual building and not in a tent. The family was traditional and held on to the place, not changing much for over 50 years or something like that, so there was still no working plumbing or electric in the actual cabin. When we arrived late Thanksgiving night, we had to light all the candles immediately and get a fire going. We also had to use an outhouse, so I avoided drinking anything on the drive up. I was so full of dinner, but I did not want to wash anything down. I wasn't about to go searching for an outhouse I had never been to in the dark. Once things warmed up a bit, we set up a bed in front of the fire and talked for a while. We were both finishing up midterms in our final year at college, and we had plans to move in together. I was so excited talking about furniture and a new car with him that I completely overlooked his pouring me more and more champagne. As we neared about 1 a.m, he told me he was so tired from eating and driving that he was going to step outside to use the bathroom and then go to sleep. As he stood up, it hit me all at once. I had to use the bathroom too. Lucky for him, he could just step out front, but I didn't have that luxury. I was forced to bundle up and head to the back of the cabin. As I prepared to walk out, I told him I was really nervous for some reason. He laughed it off and went on about how he had come up there his whole life and never had a bad encounter with an animal. I paused and asked him about a person. He looked at me like I was crazy and reminded me how far from other people we actually were. That didn't make me feel much better, but he tried. I was hoping he would come with me, but I knew he had done so much that day, and I didn't want to bother him. I wanted to show him that I was going to enjoy this trip. I walked around the cabin to the back with a flashlight. I turned it on as soon as I stepped outside and held it directly in front of me. I didn't realize that I should have probably pointed it down so I wouldn't trip. I walked slowly enough as the small wooden outhouse appeared under the moon. It wasn't terribly far. I turned back just to see how far it was when my foot was caught on a branch and I found myself face first in the snow. The flashlight jumped from my hand and off to the side, and I was left with only the moon. I started to pick myself up from the ground when I heard it. It sounded like a rabid dog growling. My eyes caught a glimpse of 2 hairy claws, the size of my head, standing only about 3 feet from me. I didn't want to look up any further, but like a train wreck, I felt compelled to. I moved up from the claws to what looked like a dog's hind legs. My first thought was a wolf getting ready to pounce me until I realized how enormous the legs were. This was bigger than my boyfriend. Up past the waist, my eyes kept going as I noticed the shape grow more human-like. It was still covered in fur. Its arms were muscular, and it almost didn't have a neck. And then I saw the face. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. The face of a wolf, but much larger, and its eyes were more like a person's than a canine. Its features were dark, but I could see that its snout was more pushed in than a dog's or a wolf's. It wasn't cute or beautiful like a dog or a wolf either. It was hideous. I could see the drool shining around its mouth. I had to look up really high to catch all of it, making whatever it was about 8 feet tall. I was sure I was going to die. Out of pure fear and adrenaline, I picked up a wad of snow and launched it at the thing. Then I scrambled to my feet and started running back to the cabin, screaming. I didn't even look back to see if it was following me. My boyfriend met me outside, obviously genuinely concerned. He looked down to see me all wet with snow. I just kept crying about a dog that also looked like a man in the woods and how I couldn't even make it to the outhouse. He grabbed my hand and walked me back to where I fell to see if the thing I was talking about was still there. There was nothing, but I picked up the flashlight and pointed it at the footprints it left in the snow. They led back into the woods. I showed him I wasn't crazy. He took the flashlight and kissed me on the head, pushing me towards the outhouse, and said he would wait for me. After I used the bathroom, I was afraid to walk out. I didn't know if that thing would come back. Instead, it was just my boyfriend, reaching for my hand to walk me back inside. He said he thought it was just my imagination getting the best of me, but I know what I saw, and I had showed him the footprints to prove it. After a night of no sleep, I begged him to take us back home. He reluctantly agreed, and so we packed up out stuff to pack it back in the car. As we were leaving, he took one last walk over to the area of the prints to check it out. Within seconds, I heard him gasp and then watched as he quickly walked back to the car where I was waiting. The look on his face told me all I needed to know. We drove in silence for a mile or so, and then he turned to look at me and said in the most serious tone I've ever heard him use. He said, "You were right, and we are so lucky to have gotten out of there alive." A few months back, I bought myself a drone. I'm a videographer for events like sports, weddings, birthdays, anything of that nature. I figured I could use the drone footage in the videos I made for people. I even got my drone license, which you need if you're going to use the footage for commercial use. I started going around the town and got footage of the neighborhood around my house, office buildings, the local school, whatever I could get. Plus, it was also good practice to get an idea how to use it, how far it can go, and all that. The idea of getting all that footage was so I could have some footage ready for whatever assignment might need it. And I always loved those big, epic shots you see in movies. One of my friends suggested flying the drone from a trail you can drive along with your car. The trail has a beautiful panoramic view of the city. I agreed that that would be the perfect place to get some footage. The GoPro I had at the time recorded pretty good night footage too, so I was planning on getting some night shots as well. One weekend, she and I headed up there to get the shots. We were there from about noon until it got dark. I had an app on my phone that streamed the drone's footage. That way I could see what was happening and maneuver it better. My friend would hold the phone, and I would handle the drone, but I did let her fly it around a little bit to get acquainted with it. It had gotten dark, and my friend was handling the drone while I was holding the phone so she could see where she was going. We were talking about how to best maneuver it when she squinted her eyes and said she could see someone in the tree line far below us. I looked at the phone and was surprised to see she was right. It looked like a man wandering far off the trail. We looked at each other and wondered what he was doing down there. From what we could tell, he was huge. In those days, you couldn't go too far with my drone without it losing its signal, so she didn't try to go out too far and get a better look. I asked her for the drone remote, but by the time I grabbed it, the figure was gone. We started making random stories to explain the guy. Maybe he was a hermit. Maybe he was some guy lost or someone living in the woods. We made plans to go again the next weekend to get more footage of the mountain, some other shots of the town, whatever interesting angles we could get. A part of me hoped we would see that huge guy again. I wanted to see what he was up to. The next weekend rolled around, and we headed to the trail again. This time we went further along the trail to get a better view of the woods below. Same time of day as last week, from noon to nighttime. Sure enough, about an hour after it got dark, we saw the strange figure again. We had a bit more range in the drone this time, so we began to track his path. Whenever he started to get out of range, we would drive a bit farther along the trail. We followed him all the way to a dead end. My friend asked if we could bring the drone closer to the man. I figured why not give it a shot. I had it hover and move slowly along the tree line below. At this point, we had lost sight of him, and we needed to squint to make anything out. After about 10 minutes of searching, we found him. He was hunched over, deeply involved in something on the ground. The picture quality wasn't the best, but he looked like he was naked. The drone hovered around him for a bit. He didn't move or anything. I tried to get a bit closer when he suddenly flinched and stood up. We were not looking at a human, and the creature was way bigger than we previously thought. He stared down at the camera as it hovered below his head. It was pretty dark, but the feed on my phone showed something sort of like an ape, but built more like a weightlifter or bodybuilder, but totally covered in hair. The more my friend and I looked at it, the more we were convinced it wasn't a man. The creature grabbed a nearby rock and threw it at the drone with such force that it brought it down. When it hit the forest floor, the feed cut out completely. We heard a scream, not a man's sound, but more primal, like the sound you would hear from apes, along with stomping noises. Next, we heard the sound of footsteps, like heavy thuds. Then they quickly disappeared. I had no intention of heading into the woods in the dark, especially knowing that this thing was out there. We decided instead to head home and try to retrieve the drone the next day when it was light. The next day, we returned, and while hiking through the woods, there was an awful smell in the air. It was distant, but distinct. After some time, we did find the drone, which had been completely destroyed. The SD card was broken, and every part of it was smashed to bits. I'm sure that no one would have believed what we saw anyway, even if we had footage of it. The footage we had taken was pretty grainy, so we never saw the animal clearly, but we could tell that it was unlike any other animal we had ever seen, even if we felt our footage was proof of a Sasquatch or a Bigfoot. Most people would have written it off as a man, or even a mutant forest animal. I've thought the same thing, but the sounds we heard were not sounds that humans could easily replicate. We never bothered telling people about it, but we knew what we saw, a huge, hairy figure that towered, even among the trees. It was definitely not a man, but try telling anyone that. Most people would assume that what we saw was a bear, and that our eyes had played tricks on us thinking it was larger than it really was. But what really convinced us was when we found the drone. The drone had been completely smashed into the dirt. All around it were footprints, huge footprints. The prints were similar to a man's, but longer and wider than any foot I've ever seen. We know what we saw. Since that day, I've been saving up money, hoping that the creature didn't take off to another forest, hoping that maybe, just maybe, I will get clear footage of it someday. I was out driving in the Australian outback in December of 2011 when the most intense day of my life occurred. I was on a deserted road and was headed to my camping destination when I saw a massive creature walking towards my car. It was about the size of a large dog, and when I say large, I mean like an English Mastiff, but at the same time didn't look exactly like a dog. It had brown fur and walked on two legs like a human, and it moved fast. It was looking right at me like it had a purpose or an agenda with me. Of course, I was terrified and wondered why this thing was focused on me and thought about what it was going to do to me. Was going to kill me or what? But to my surprise, it just walked right by my car with that same intense look on its face. I mean, it was definitely on a mission of some sort. It was an absolutely surreal experience and something I'll never forget. Strangely akin to what it must be like being on a safari, where the most amazing creatures walk right by you, like you're invisible. Or maybe it's that they're just used to you. And right when I thought I was safe, the creature turned around and looked right at me again. This time its eyes were so intense, and I felt like it could see my soul. But after a few seconds, it just turned away again and continued walking off. I sat there in my car for a good while, trying to make sense of what I had just seen and wondering why it had come at me twice. Bottom line is that I felt lucky to be alive, but also super confused. What was that thing, and why did it just walk by me without doing anything? It was for sure some creature that isn't officially cataloged. I mean, I'm in the outback a lot, and I've never seen this thing in any official book or whatever. I figured that there must be someone who would know more about this, but I wasn't planning to be back in civilization for a few days, so I would just have to wait. So once I got to my campsite and set up everything, all I could do was sit around my campfire and think about what I had seen. As for what it looked like, I don't think there are enough words to truly describe it. It's something you have to see for yourself to believe. but I will tell you that it had an eerie, almost human-like face and gave me the heebie-jeebies, and its arms were really long and muscular, almost like a gorilla's. So the truth is that the encounter got in my head pretty bad, and I had a hard time sleeping that night. And the next morning it was still eating away at me, so I decided to pack up and head back to where I could ask someone about what I saw. I decided that it would be best to go to the police and tell them what I saw, figuring that they would be the first to hear reports of these things and know more about them. But when I got there, they just looked at me with a confused look on their face. They said that I had probably seen a dingo, which is an Australian wild dog. But I know what I saw, and it was nothing like any normal-sized dog. And you know what else? As I was walking out of that station, I noticed one of the officers who listened to my story, writing something down very purposely. I still have a weird feeling about seeing him writing like that. It's almost like he really did believe me and was keeping notes. Like maybe they have a special file or something that's off the record. Anyway, it's hard to describe what I feel like now and what it felt like to experience all of that. But it was almost like the creature was intelligent and aware of me, very human-like, and I also got the feeling that it knew I was scared. Maybe that's why it just continued walking. Who knows? And I'm sorry my thoughts are all over the place. It's just difficult to get it all out in one perfect stream. As I talk about it, lots of bits and pieces of the day come flying back into my memory. Anyway, I've been doing a lot of thinking and looking online about this thing, and I still can't find anything that looks even remotely like the creature I saw. So, if anyone out there knows something about this, or has had a similar experience, especially if you're from Australia, please let me know. I feel like I'm carrying this secret with me and need to talk to someone about it. One late night, I found myself in a restless mood. It was a little after Halloween was over, but my boyfriend and I were still, in a sense, celebrating it, wanting to scare each other a bit more. Who doesn't want to do something scary this time of year, right? So I started looking up spooky things we could do near our home. We had read about a bridge where weird things were said to happen, and it was not too terribly far from our house. It was about an hour away. So we both decided that it would be cool to go see what it was all about. To get to it, we had to head down a very long dirt path. The area was rural, but there were some houses scattered around. There were some streetlights every now and then, but they were very dim. I hadn't ever been to this part of the state, so everything looked a bit creepier than anything that had ever scared me before, but I was doing my best not to freak myself out. There were lots of trees and plenty of fields to make your mind start to question things. I guess my mind was working a little too hard to make me scared before we even got there. When our GPS alerted us that we had finally arrived, it didn't make much sense. If I'm being honest, the drive to the location seemed a bit more scary than the actual place. It didn't really feel like a bridge, and even though it was in the middle of nowhere, I didn't realize we'd be stopped in the middle of the road where cars might fly past us in the night. I even remember asking, "Is this it?" I guess I was more scared of being hit by a car in the dark than I was of the stories I had read. So I was hesitant, to say the least. Hesitant that we'd not experience anything, or that we'd be hit by a car on a dark road, or maybe a bit of both. We sat in the car for a while with our hazards on and realized that we wouldn't really be able to experience much inside the car. So of course we got out of the car to walk around a bit. We didn't venture too far from it since it was extremely dark with no street lamps in sight, and we were in the middle of the road, so that was a little scary, but we did walk a ways away from the car. I guess you can say we were far out enough to hear the little noises of nature, leaves rustling, crickets chirping. You know what I mean. We were out of the car for several minutes. The air was definitely cold, and the wind was starting to pick up a bit, but everything was very calm. Really, it was actually peaceful. At this point, I wasn't scared at all. I wasn't even standing very close to my partner when he said, "Do you hear that?" I thought I had been hearing things, so I didn't mention it before he did. But I had been hearing a strange rumbling sound out towards this field off to my left. I quietly replied, "Yeah, I hear it. Do you think a storm is coming?" He just shrugged like he wasn't really sure. But the wind was getting louder, so we sat trying to listen for the rumbling to start again. Honestly, I don't think the sound ever stopped. I think it just was hidden behind some of the other sounds going on. But one thing I did start to notice is that all the crickets had stopped chirping. I also noticed that the wind would pick up and trail off. It never really stayed windy or still for too long. So in between it all, we could definitely hear the rumbling. Again, I wasn't really scared yet. Well, I wasn't until I started to notice something odd about the rumbling. That's when I said, "Wait, does it sound like it's getting louder? Like closer to us?" My boyfriend looked at me and said, "I was just about to ask you that." I tried seeing as best as I could. So I was basically squinting at the field, and I swear it looked like a shadow of a big buffalo or something was out in the field. It was very confusing, but I couldn't tell if it was an animal or some sort of issue with my eyes. But the shadow started moving and eventually disappeared. Again, it was very dark, and I wasn't really sure if what I saw was real or my imagination. Once the shadow disappeared, the wind stopped blowing, and that's when my heart dropped into my stomach. The rumbling sound that we heard was becoming more and more clear, and actually, it didn't sound like rumbling much at all. It sounded like rhythmic drumming that followed a similar pattern to a beat. It was like a song. I looked at my boyfriend. Both of us were astonished, but we were, at this point, very convinced that the drumming was getting more and more close as we stood in the same spot. It didn't take very long before we started to hear what sounded like movement in the field. It sounded like an animal or someone walking through the thickets, so I continued looking for that huge shadow. I never did see it again, but that wasn't even the scariest part. As the drumming sounded closer to us, a faint sound of humming and singing could be heard. My boyfriend must have been really freaked out because he blurted out, "Okay, it's time to leave now." We ran back to our car, slammed our doors, and drove away before we could even put our seatbelts on. On our way back home, I kept replaying the scenario over and over again in my head. Had I really seen something in the field? My boyfriend didn't ever mention anything about it. I suppose that didn't really matter. We both heard the drumming and singing voices, and that was enough for us. It was unbelievable. But my boyfriend and I are sure of the things we experienced on that bridge. We are 100% in agreement on that. This creature sighting occurred outside of Austin, Texas in November of 2012. It was about 9 o'clock at night, and I was on my way home from playing a happy hour gig one Tuesday night. I was just a few miles away from my house outside of Austin when I saw something in the road, up a small hill in the distance. At first, I thought it was a deer, but then I realized that something about it didn't fit the look of a deer. After driving another 1,000 feet or so, I was closer and could make out the shape better, and realized that it was actually a black bear, and it was massive. It was still a bit in the distance, but it looked like the bear was standing on its hind legs, and I'm pretty sure it was taller than most other black bears. I didn't know what to do, if I should keep driving or not. I had never been this close to a black bear before, and certainly not in this part of Texas, and this thing looked like it was going to stand its ground despite my oncoming car. As I was getting closer to it, I could not see that it was looking off into the trees, and it seemed to be just standing there looking, like it was waiting for something. Well, there were no other cars on the road, so I decided to slowly drive past it in the oncoming lane. And as I was passing, I got a really good look at its face, and instantly knew that it wasn't a bear. It was a dog-like creature, but not a dog. It wasn't shaped exactly correctly, and its body was entirely too long, even bigger up close than I had previously thought. It wasn't growling or snarling at me. It just stood there looking back and forth between the trees and me, very well aware of me and watching me pass by. And do you know what happened next? As I was passing it, it started to walk away. It just walked off the road in the direction that it had been looking and didn't even look back. And that's when I hit the gas to speed up. I was thinking about what had happened and racking my brain trying to think about what it could have been, and very happy to be on the last stretch home. But as I approached the last mile to my house, I looked in my rearview mirror and, don't you know, I saw that thing coming at my car, and fast. It was barely touching the ground and looked like it was flying almost. And this time it got so close to my car that I could see its eyes in the rearview mirror, and they were glowing a bright green. I kept glancing back at it and can remember in slow motion watching it as it leaped into the air in a way I can't even describe and jumped onto the trunk of my car. My entire car bounced with the weight of it, and I was just hoping the car didn't crap out on my now. So here I was, driving down a road I'm super familiar with, and there is this creature is on my trunk. The mix of the familiar and totally unfamiliar was almost too much for me to deal with. I kept looking back, hoping it would jump off and leave me alone, but all I could see was that its fur was so matted and gross, and it was growling and snarling in at me. While looking back at it, I missed a curve in the road, and the car came to a stop along the side of it in the grass. And do you know what happened next? The creature got off my car and walked away like nothing happened. It didn't even look back. When I finally calmed down and got out of the car, I saw that it had left paw prints all over the trunk as well as scratches on the paint. I was completely shaken after my encounter with that creature, and I'm still not sure what it was, or even if it exists. All I know is that I never want to see it again. Whatever it was massive and scary, and I thought for sure it was going to kill me at one point, but it didn't. It just walked away like nothing happened. Still, the experience has stayed with me and will probably always be one of the craziest things that's ever happened to me. Well, not probably. For sure it will be the craziest thing. It all makes me wonder what else is out there in the world waiting to happen. To me or anyone else. Be careful out there, everyone. There is a lot in this world that we don't know.